Thank you. Now, the last big event that was held at Sky City prior to us was the big boxing match between Monty Barrett and Shane Cameron, so it's appropriate to introduce the next speaker as coming out of the red corner. Would you please welcome the Leader of the Opposition, David Shearer. He's coming in at a jog as well. Here he comes.
Kia ora tātou, thank you very much. We did actually shake hands on the way out, you'll notice, those of you who are watching. So it's not that violent in Parliament as people think. Look, it's a very great pleasure to be here today and to be able to have the opportunity to address you. I'm here with Claire Curran. Many of you know Claire, who's been our spokesperson not only on ICT but also on the open government, which I know she's running a workshop on or a panel on a little bit later on. I'd like to start off this morning with a personal story. I guess it's my sort of introduction to the power of information and information technology. About 8 or 9 years ago, before I entered this esteemed profession of politics, I was involved with the United Nations in heading their humanitarian office in Jerusalem, and my job was to coordinate aid to the Gaza and the West Bank. And when I arrived there, because of the security situation and the number of suicide bombs that were going off, the number of checkpoints that the Israelis were putting into the West Bank where the Palestinians were living had gone up to an extraordinarily high number. There was about 90 odd checkpoints and about 600 or 700 blocks put on roads. The checkpoints were there for security, but the more that we sort of saw what was going on, we realised that actually there was other issues other than security being peddled as well. But what they did was that they stopped people getting to work, kids getting to school, students getting to universities, and people getting to hospitals. In fact, we had a number of women who gave birth at checkpoints trying to get through them, and actually a number of people who died at checkpoints trying to get through to hospitals. And as a humanitarian, my job was to go and talk to the Israelis and actually get them to ease their checkpoint regime. And we weren't having very much luck doing it or much ability to persuade them, because we didn't necessarily have a good overview of what was actually happening and what was going on. Now, this is 10 years ago, so this is pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook, etc. What we did was my staff all got these new GPSs, and they went out and they GPSed every single checkpoint and roadblock right across the area. We photographed them. We took satellite data, satellite imagery and aerial imagery, and we plotted all of these checkpoints onto these maps, and they were interactive maps that you could go onto the internet. You can still actually go onto them and see them on the website today. And we enabled ourselves to be able to build up a picture with statistics of exactly not only where these checkpoints, etc., were located, but the exact impact they were having on the day-to-day life of Palestinians. And they became extraordinarily powerful tools to raise the visibility of not only what was happening across the whole area, across the whole region, but actually neighbourhood to neighbourhood, and they were being viewed across the whole world. We were able to point out where violations were taking place, where poverty was occurring, and most importantly, we were able to show where we were able to exert leverage with the security authorities to have some of these checkpoints eased so that people could go backwards and forwards. Our website sort of skyrocketed from a few hundred hits a month to, I think it's getting up to 200,000 a month at the moment. So people were going on it as a resource. Why do I talk about this? I mean, well, given what's going on certainly in that region with the nascent Arab Spring, what we're seeing is the extraordinary power of technology and not only being able to do what I was able to do in that part of the Middle East, but also to bring about the end of dictatorial regimes and authoritarian regimes by the power of technology being able to go beyond the power of the state and beyond those regimes as well. So it's not just about an efficient tool for connecting buyers to sellers or readers to writers, but it's actually a huge force for real social transformation. It's almost, as I said before, it's almost scarcely believable that when I started doing that work, Facebook was not even something you talked about. Twitter, YouTube, etc. was barely thought about. And then I guess today to be able to predict where where technology is going to go is a pretty fraught sort of a business if you're in the sort of the fortune telling business. What we do know though is that the power of the internet will increase. We don't exactly know what it'll bring, but certainly it will increase, and it will increase in power. It's a revolution that is gathering more and more steam, or perhaps I should actually say megahertz rather than steam today. It seems slightly out of date as we go forward. But let's be realistic as well at where we are in New Zealand today. For many people right now, life is actually pretty tough, and people will tell you that they've never been working as hard as they have been in the past. The truth is in New Zealand that unless we make significant changes, it's going to be vastly tougher 2 decades from today. In the words of the late Sir Paul Callaghan, we have chosen to be poor, and we're not doing nearly enough to change that. And people, I don't believe, are nearly aware of just how big a problem that is for New Zealand. We are thin on the high-value industries that prosperous countries can boast of, and we're overweight on the businesses where your hourly rate or hourly input equates to a comparatively poor output. In fact, we're working harder for less than any other country in the world, or certainly in OECD, other than Iceland. Unless we make big changes of the kind of work that we do, many of us do, and the investments we make, until we make those big changes in how we invest in education and research and development, then nothing really is going to change. And I have a very strong belief in the centrality of innovation and science to our future prosperity. I held on to the portfolio of science and innovation as the leader of the Labour Party. It's very unusual to hold on to a portfolio, and it's for the very reason that I believe very strongly that New Zealand has to change, and it has to change in a very bold way. We do need to be bold, and we do need our next government to be reformist. It must make big progressive changes needed to remake the economy, and nowhere is it this more important than in industries such as yours. Let me give you one example. Alcatel-Lucent projects broadband to deliver $32 billion in benefits to New Zealand end users over the next 20 years. The NZEIR report got it right when it said that internet provides the possibility for transformative economic and social change. More promisingly, the digital future and the weightless economy allow us to tame what we've always talked about as the tyranny of distance. It's been one of those challenges that has faced New Zealand it's always faced New Zealand. And research by Philip McCann showed that the adverse effects of our isolation on our labour productivity, and therefore on our growth, were greater than for any other advanced country, with the exception perhaps of Australia. He said that the OECD estimates suggest that the tyranny of distance reduces our labour productivity, which I believe is one of the underlying problems that we face in New Zealand, by more than 10%. And the IMF more or less confirms what Philip McCann says. It notes that half of the productivity gap between New Zealand and the OECD average is the result of geography alone. My point here is that distance from markets has a price. And it's a challenge that we first overcame in the very beginnings of New Zealand's history via technology. Again, Paul Callaghan wrote, it was refrigerated shipping that lifted New Zealand from subsistence trade to relative wealth. And in this new century, we're faced with the same challenges, and I believe technology offers the same solution that it did to New Zealand 130 years ago, but in a completely different area. Our primary industries are hugely important to New Zealand, as we all know, and they always will be. But ultimately, it's our ideas and our talent, our science and our innovation that will underpin our future, both in agriculture, but more importantly, beyond. And when I write about this, I often get people, or blog on it or whatever, I invariably get somebody writing in and saying, what have you got against farmers? And the answer is, well, I've got nothing against farmers. It's not an or, it's an and. We need to develop our high-tech, our ICT industries at the same time as we're developing agriculture, and at the same time we don't actually in a sense separate them, because if you're looking at how we do so well in agriculture, it's all about science, innovation and technology as well. The potential gain for New Zealand from the development and export of high-tech and high-value products, therefore, is immense. And it's something that we are acutely aware of as we start getting deeper into the TPP discussions that are going on at the moment, the negotiations that are going on at the moment. As Labour Party, we're committed to taking a principled approach that puts New Zealand's interests front and centre. We have negotiated trade deals with other countries and ensured that those interests are protected. But there is little doubt that gaining access to many of these potentially new countries offer huge opportunities, but not at the expense of our right to make laws and regulations for the public good and a whole range of other issues, and that includes intellectual property and copyright. We also need to think about, or think beyond, where some of the negotiations have concentrated, which is in the sort of the milk powder and red meat area, and concentrate on where New Zealand would want to be into the future. We have to enhance the benefit from innovation and technology, because these are the areas that will matter into our future. As a country, we are well placed to seize this opportunity, and it's time to seriously commit to a different vision to what we have had up to now. We may not be able to fit more cows on our land, but through science and innovation, design, through digital technology, we can lift ourselves and grow the jobs that will keep our young people in New Zealand. If we look at the like-sized countries around the world, we look at Singapore, where it was 20, 30 years ago, Israel, Denmark, Finland. These are countries that have a fraction of the natural resources that we have come to depend on and based most of our industry around. They have rocketed ahead through their own innovation, their talent, and on the back of advanced technology. If they can do it, and so can we. And I want to see more exporting businesses using our science and technology advantage. Our spend on science is one of the lowest in the OECD, particularly in our businesses, which is, despite the fact there's some tax issues around how they declare that money, it's still extraordinarily low. And our goal is to lift that radically. We have some fantastic high-tech companies in New Zealand that are growing, but not nearly enough. They need to be doubled, tripled, quadrupled. I also want to see a greater commitment to keeping our outstanding scientists here in New Zealand. Our leading scientists have said that we may lose 40%, up to 40% of our postdoctoral positions because of a change in government policies that's taken away many of those opportunities. The loss of these opportunities is driving New Zealanders and skilled New Zealanders overseas, and our ability and our future will be built on retaining those skills and talent and being able to compete with the best in the world. We do need a skilled workforce that can take advantage of the job opportunities that a 21st century economy will demand. And that means addressing some of the equity issues as well. There are swathes of New Zealand that completely lack the most fundamental technologies, a computer in the home, and some terrific there's some terrific projects out there to put computers into the homes of people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it, but it's not nearly enough, and we have to make sure all of New Zealand moves and not just one part of it. If we want to do more in the high-value export industries, then our children must be equipped to do the job we're going to be asking them to do. If you look at science graduates in the area of engineering, mathematics, chemistry, computer science, over the last few years, they've more or less flatlined. If you look at accounting and law, they've gone like this. What I'm saying is that we need to be focusing, if we're going to be promoting a science, design, high-tech future, we have to start in our schools. And that means broader, more creative curriculums, not narrow curriculums that focus on just a small range of subjects. So there are some fundamental changes that need to take place, and that will be the focus of any government that I lead. I've no interest in leading a government that is cautiously tinkering. We need to be reformist and we need to be bold. And most importantly, I want to say we are interested in ideas. We want to listen. I've outlined some of the broad parameters that we are going along and we are following. But the how, the exact precise policies that we want to be in place on the 1st of December 2014 are not yet complete. And we want to have that conversation with you so that those policies are actually ready to go. We don't want to be in a situation where we're starting off at the beginning of that term and calling in officials to ask them, what do you think we should do next? We want to have an agenda and it's ready to roll out. So we're interested in engaging with you to make sure that we have that agenda set and in place. Lastly, if Finland, as I said, Singapore, Israel can change their small economies in a small amount of time, then so can we, and we'll do it in our own uniquely New Zealand way. Thank you very much.
David, would you want to take some questions?
I can if you like, yeah.
In the spirit of fairness, we will allow 3 questions. I would ask that those questions be brief and that the answers be brief, just in terms of time. So if we have anyone who would like to ask a question.
That's brief.
That's very brief. Here we go.
I'll take the Kit Kat and go.
Here we go. There's one here. And we'll come to your second. Yeah. Yes?
If you call it out and I can repeat it.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. My question, you talked about the importance of science and technology. No?
You go.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay. You talked about the importance of science and technology and presumably the scientific process and the development of technology in New Zealand. What part will that play, or the scientific process play, in the policy development itself?
It's a very good question. I mean, if I can say one thing that I thought that this government has done well, and that's not what I want to hear from an opposition politician, but and that's the inclusion of a science advisor, Prime Minister's science advisor. And one of the things that Sir Peter Gluckman is doing, which I think is good, is actually saying let's have evidence-based policy. And I actually think that's in part in relation to your question, is to make sure that our policy actually is rather than is evidence-based rather than being based on other factors.
Just briefly on TPP, we're looking. Everyone agrees we want a high-quality agreement. That doesn't seem to be in dispute, but. Could you give us a little bit more nuance about the specifics in terms of your views on investor states dispute resolution and the IP chapter, and whether or not they should be compromised we should make compromises in relation to those issues?
Yeah, investor state dispute resolution I think is the really thorny issue. I don't want to go on and on, but I think we're going to have to take some real care around this. The thing that gives me hope is that when you look at the other countries who are also concerned about this, it's the very countries that we're worried about, which is the United States or whatever. Their companies do not want to put themselves through the same investor state resolution as well. So there's actually quite a logjam going on, from what I can understand, right across the board. That gives me some confidence. What I will say is, and it's a really difficult, the TPP is hugely difficult for us because we're not actually sure what's going on. We don't see what's going on any more than anybody else does here. We ask questions in Parliament. We have asked questions in Parliament. We've put Tim Grosser on notice and said this is where our bottom line is. But until we actually see the words on paper, we don't exactly know what's happening. And I just want to say that has created an enormous amount of anxiety that I think is partially avoidable. Yes, negotiations have to be done somewhat behind closed doors, but you can do a whole lot more to lessen the anxiety if you are a bit more open about what you're trying to do and where you're going with it. And I'm not sure that that's happening. I know, for example, I talked this through with Phil Goff, who led the China Free Trade Agreement. And one of the things he made sure he did was he sat down with Business New Zealand, with CTU, and a bunch of different other organisations and actually talked through some of the issues and where they were going with it. Now, TPP is at another level in terms of complexity, I think. But nevertheless, I think some discussion would actually be very welcome.
That last one, just down in the corner there.
Morning, Minister.
I'd like to be, I'm not yet, okay? But thanks very much. You can see to the future, obviously.
Yeah, I'm good like that in the fortune. What effect do you think the asset sales will have on the ICT industry in New Zealand in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a good question. I actually haven't put that together. I mean, we're very much opposed to asset sales, as you know. I don't think that New Zealand will prosper as a result of this. I think a few people will, and a few companies will, and a few overseas corporations will, but actually not New Zealand. These are assets that we all own, and we are shifting them into the partial ownership of a small group. But I don't believe that that necessarily anybody in New Zealand is necessarily going to prosper significantly out of it.
Yeah, that question was actually for Stephen Joyce, but I'll leave it for later.
All right, well, thank you very much. I declare that contest this morning a draw. Rematch in October 2014, I believe.
Absolutely,
All
yeah.
right.
But invite me back again. I'll give you an update on how we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Take Kit Kat.
All right, well,
Thank you to both our speakers for taking time out of their schedules this morning.